All right, let's do this. Give me a countdown.
Da ti da 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 ti da 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 ti da da ah.
Kya baat. You gotta love those tabla countdowns. Welcome to another episode of Absolute Focus. All right. Today we're really lucky. We're sponsored by Jonathan and Jonathan.
I thought it was Johnson and Johnson.
Yeah, they can't afford us. All right. Jonathan and Jonathan is they make powder specifically for tabla players to put on your hands. But if you put it on your tabla, like your tabla will melt. All right.
Jonathan and Jonathan?
Yeah. Yeah, Jonathan and Jonathan.
Jonathan. Okay,
Yeah.
got you.
So we're really lucky to have them on board as sponsors. And I hope they don't get sued by Johnson & Johnson for stealing their formula. There's something I wanted to talk about, like our sound engineer, Jackson. I heard the first episode, and I sound terrible. Like, listen, Jackson, I want you to make me sound like if, like, Barry White and Morgan Freeman had a kid, and then Liev Schreiber and James Earl Jones had a kid, and then those two kids got married and had a kid. Like, that's what I want the EQ settings to be for my mic. All right? You straighten that out in this episode. We're really lucky today. We have a very special guest. He's a close friend of ours. And there's so much to say about him, right? There's so much to say about this amazing individual. But if there's one thing I want people to take away, right? Like, if there's one thing I want people to, like, know about this guy, right? Like, you might think it's like that he's a disciple of Ustad Zakir Hussain, right? But that's not the one thing. Okay. It might be that he has a doctorate in music from the California Institute of the Arts.
Yeah.
Right? But that's not the most important thing.
Okay.
It might be that he uses his music for social change, right? Social activism. Right?
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. It's an okay thing, right? But that's not it. Okay.
All right.
So you don't need to remember all this, right? It might be that he's an internationally touring musician, right? That he's like performed basically in every country in the world, like on every continent.
That's
I
a
think
big
even
deal
Antarctica, but like I'm not sure. But it's okay, right?
Okay.
But that's not the one thing. Okay?
What's the thing then?
The one thing I want people to remember about this guy, right, is that him and I are two different people. All right? Let's give a round of applause to my guest, Neelamjit Dhillon, a.k.a. Neelamjit Dhillon.
Not just in the same twin.
Yeah. We are
All
not
the same
twins. We are
person.
not the same people. So welcome to the show, Neelamjit. This happens all the time, all right? So let me tell you about a gig. This was a corporate gig that I was doing in Long Beach, okay? And people walk up, three people, and throughout the course of the evening.
Who we don't know.
I don't know these people. They walk up to me. They're like, hey, you played really well. Like, we enjoyed your music so much. We heard you before, like, you played with the Aditya Prakash Ensemble. And I said, yeah, I have played. Like, were you guys in LA? And I forget the venue name now. But
like theater.
Yeah, and I said, were you there? And they're like, no, it wasn't in LA. And I was like, oh, like, well, we did a bunch of rehearsal sessions at UCLA. Like, were you there? And they're like, no, we were in Bakersfield. And I go, that's Neelamjit. Okay, that's not me. All right, just because we have like beards, all right, and we're both sick,
And you happen to play tabla.
Yeah, does not mean we're the same people. Am I right?
We're dashingly handsome as
Right.
well.
That must mean you are too.
I mean, we have different pagadi styles. Like my pagadi style is from like the African diaspora, right? His is different. Like, how can I wear glasses? He doesn't. I usually wear super shiny kurtas with like sequins and like Christmas lights, right? And he wears like more simple kurtas. He's a simple down to earth guy, right? I'm not down to earth. But you have similar stories, right? That people think that
it's pretty ridiculous. Like, there was a festival of tabla that just happened this past summer.
Yeah.
Which is
and we were
awesome,
there.
by the way.
It's a fantastic event. All
Big
these
up to
tabla
Rupesh.
players playing and representing Indian music and culture. So I was there playing with a sitar player. I wasn't even playing a tabla solo. And we were there hanging out because you were playing a tabla solo.
Yeah.
And so I was accompanying a sitar player named Rajiv Karmakar later
A total
on this
badass.
day. Earlier in the day, Jazz is closing off the middle session with a tabla solo, which was amazing, crushing. I'm standing at the back with Kamaljeet actually by the soundboard as she's feverishly telling him what to change in the sound because it was not sounding good.
Was it
wasn't the
Jackson?
playing.
Did you mess up my sound again? Or was it somebody else?
It was probably Jackson.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
damn it,
All right.
Jackson. Anyways, so amazing solo, mind blowing, wonderful. And then there was a break, an intermission. And then we're getting some food and we're hanging out. We're in the hallway with all the people before I have to play now with the sitar player. And people are coming up to me and they're like, your solo was so good. And I was like, I haven't played yet. Oh, that's right. They think I'm Jaswinder.
Yeah, so I want people to know we're different people.
They're in the same room at the same time.
Yeah, so this at the Tabla Festival, I think this happened to me on the next day. Was a person came up to me and he said, I'm from Chicago, I have a project, and I need like santur and bansuri. And I said, like, great, I know people that can do that. They're like, oh, I thought you played bansuri and saxophone. And I was like, oh, yeah, he's wearing the blue kurta over there.
That's what
And
happened.
then I later told you like to go find that guy because he had some work for you. So I don't know if that ever came through, but yeah. And then the other thing is like, we would expect this from the people that like have certain melanin deficiencies, right? They're pigment challenged. What are those people called?
I don't know what you're referring to.
You know what I'm referring to.
I
But
do,
this is happening
yeah.
from
Trying to be polite here.
Indian people. Like why are Indian people like confusing us?
Maybe
Well-
they've never seen two Punjabi Sikh playing tablas.
They never been to Gurdwara or like seen it? What?
I don't know.
Maybe
They should
not.
go to Gurdwaras because the langar's awesome.
It's that hyphen, man. See, the Indian Americans.
Yeah.
That hyphen is weighing heavily on people these days. They're losing that connection.
Yeah, the hyphen is confusing. Like, am I African American?
Yeah,
My
because your
parents are from
parents are from
Africa.
Africa.
Charlize Theron is African American.
Yeah.
Wait, am I African Indian American?
No, you're British.
Oh yeah. But not. Wait, should I be all four? My mom and dad.
Yeah, it's complicated. man.
Africa, India, England, and now America.
Yeah, it's super complicated.
And then do your kids carry that on?
I'm a global citizen. I don't care about where I'm from. I'm from the world.
Wow.
Proper Indian classical response.
The world is my oyster. Even though I'm a vegetarian.
So where are you coming from, Neelamjit? What projects have you just finished?
I just got off the road, a North American tour with Sanatam Kaur. So I've been touring with her for the last 3 years all over the world. And then I was up in Vancouver, Canada, where I was born and raised. On the playgrounds, I spent most of my days.
Man, I should have worn that t-shirt. Next time.
But I was up there visiting my parents and did a project up there of a friend of mine, Ivan Tukakov, and his band Tambura Rasa. It's like a flamenco project with
Oh my
mix a lot
goodness.
of global influences. So I was playing as a part
man.
of that concert.
I want
which
to hear
was-
that concert.
It was wonderful to see lots of my friends and this community of musicians in Vancouver that I grew up with and have played with, and from all different kinds of styles because Vancouver is such a multicultural place. So I never thought twice about just, hey, let me play some tabla with some flamenco music or with some
Yeah.
Chinese musicians or with some Persian musicians, and we're all just friends and we all just play. So that's kind of what I grew up in. And then I moved down to LA 8 years now, like you said, the California Institute of the Arts. So I came down to do my master's, which turned into my doctorate. And now I'm just a badass performing musician.
Yeah, you
who
are.
Composes and performs all over the place.
And you're blessed, man. Like the work you get and the work that you do is just
Yeah, it's
awesome.
amazing.
Oh, thank you very much. No, I'm really lucky. You just hope, I guess for all of us as artists, you just try to do your thing to the best of your ability and
That's all
hope that opportunities will come your way. You just put your best foot forward and good things will happen.
Yeah.
We all know those musicians who are out there who are, they have all the hustle in the world, but they don't have the playing to back it up.
All the other way around.
Or
too.
the other way around,
Yeah.
which is, equally as tragic. But you hope that you try to put yourself out there like you guys are doing, and you try to play when you can, how you can, and it'll all just work out.
Yeah, man. So how many concerts did you do on this tour?
This last tour
The
was
Sanatam tour.
15 concerts plus a Gurdwara session in Phoenix. So they always do one Gurdwara, that's a Sikh temple, one Gurdwara like Seva concert
Yeah.
Okay.
on every tour. So no matter where where we are somewhere during the
lovely.
tour. Yeah, a way to reach out to the community.
Yeah.
And then you're playing not just tabla, but you're playing bansuri. You're
That's right. Playing bansuri on some songs, playing tabla in many different keys. So I got to keep them in tune.
yeah.
I have a big row of tabla on the side. So depending
Wow.
on what song she wants to play, I got to make sure do that. And then along with that goes carrying all that gear around.
I know, how much excess baggage do you have to pay for?
Yeah, I try to keep it as minimal. So the thing that suffers is my clothing. I just like pack really minimally because all my baggage is full of instruments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
I have to do that too with my sandur.
Yeah.
So how'd you get into learning more than one instrument and like becoming proficient in it?
The time is great. I figure if you just do something long enough, eventually you'll get good enough to fool people into thinking you know what you're doing.
You know what you're doing.
I kind of know what I'm doing. But so again, growing up in Vancouver, I would go to the Gurdwara, the Sikh temple, as a way to play and learn tabla and play it in kirtan, devotional music. And then at school, I was playing saxophone in the school band. My best friend growing up, ever since I was a kid, Lucas Smalley, and his family, he had 3 brothers and a sister, and they had a little band growing up. So Lucas played the drums, and his brother played guitar and bass, and his sister played keyboard, and I think the other guy played
That's so cool.
tambourine. So I lived at his house as much as I lived at my house. This is
Awesome.
my best friend since kindergarten.
Oh wow.
And we're still in touch. He lives in Montreal with his family.
That's wonderful.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I was spending all this time at his house and playing all these instruments. So when it came time to be in band where we got to pick an instrument or choose an elective even, I was like, there's no doubt that it's going to be music, even though I was playing tabla at that time. And me and Lucas had done some tabla drum set jams. But now he was going to play trumpet. And I was like, well, I don't want to be left out. I can't play tabla in the school concert band. So let me learn saxophone.
That's awesome.
And
That's
then
fun.
so that was my at school life. And then at home, professional, not so professional, was playing tabla. And then slowly I just kept doing the two and keeping them separate and learning each tradition independently and with as much authenticity as I could. So playing jazz music or playing Indian classical music and trying to do each one with a lot of integrity. And then later in life, those two paths started to merge closer and closer together.
That's cool. I mean, we've known you for several years now, and we've done gigs where, like the promoter or the organizer or whatever, they'll say we want something different. And we'll just be like, well, Neelamjit will just pull out a different instrument. And it's different. So we've done like where Kamaljeet and Neelamjit have played
Sax and
santur. We've done bansuri and santur.
santur.
We did a gig where it was shanai and tabla, and then of course the tabla, you play tabla always there, but usually when I'm around, then like I don't let you play tabla because. Although no, we played together at the Ali Akbar College of Music.
Yeah, you did.
We did the final item all together on stage.
With
We both
Kais
played tabla.
and
Kais
us.
played rabab.
Yeah, that was a good gig.
That was an
That was
amazing
so
gig.
much fun.
Fantastic.
That dairy was so much fun.
Well, what a pleasure. To
Yeah,
be-
there's that just reminded me of something. There's something about Indian classical musicians. It's a trait that like Neelamjit and I unfortunately don't possess, and it's so like I'm wondering, like will we make it? Because we don't have this trait.
Oh my god, what is this trait?
This
I don't know
trait
what
is
you're
that
talking
like
about.
to show up late
Oh, okay.
to gigs, like
And never email back.
yeah, like we respond to emails
On
and
time.
texts, and we show up on time. So like
Actually,
we
didn't,
performed at-
didn't Mary G say something about that when we got
yeah.
there?
So Mary, we were blessed enough to perform at the Ali Akbar College of Music, which was it's a career highlight for us.
Yeah.
Alam Khan, who's Ali Akbar Khan Saab's student, and Mary G invited us all, right?
And Mary is Ali Akbar Khan's wife.
Wife.
Alam
Yeah.
is their son.
Yeah. And they give us, they say show up at 5:30, right? So 2 cars are pulling into the parking lot
At the same time.
at the same time, right? Like, and I know like that the reason Kais's car is pulling up at that time is because Neelamjit was with him,
I'm the one driving.
right? So Neelamjit is with
What are you
him.
trying to say about Kais, man?
We'll get into that. He's going to be a guest later on in the show, but we'll ask him.
Okay.
But I know that the reason that car is pulling up at 5:30 is because of Neelamjit, and I know the car that we're driving is pulling up at 5:30 because of me. Right, because
What's he telling about me now?
Kamaljeet is, she has a degree in art,
She's British.
yeah, British, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, British people are always on time.
No, but you're a little late.
The hyphens have slowed down.
We started this episode 1 hour late. Okay, but anyways,
I think it was longer.
we walk up the stairs, knock on the door because everything's locked. Mary G opens it, and we're like, "Hey, great to be here," and she's like, "In the history of this 45-year institution." No one has showed up on time, ever.
She was really enthusiastic.
She was like,
about
she was
that.
enthusiastic
She really
and
was.
just completely shocked. And then we were like, and then I kind of made a little bit of a joke. I was like, well, we grew up in the West, and she's like, so have a lot of musicians that have performed here. They're not on time. So why is that? Why do we have this sense of, so this happens
Indian
every gig.
Standard Time.
Yeah, I don't have the Indian Standard Time. They'll say show up to a sound check at 2:00, and I'm like pushing Kamaljeet, we got to get there. We show up at 2:00, and the sound guy is not even there. There's no stage
there's
set
nothing
up.
set up yet.
And I realized the promoters are playing this game with us.
They know.
That they want us to they think we're gonna be late, so they're telling us an earlier time, and then we
know
end
that
up
game.
we always show up 2 hours early, and I think it's just me and you, man.
Maybe that's why they think you're twins.
Maybe.
You have similar traits.
Do you think it's because you grew up in Southern California, Los Angeles? You always have to account for traffic.
Yeah, I don't.
Always got to leave early.
I just
Leave that
feel,
buffer time.
You do need.
I don't know. I feel this sense of we're gonna be late. We're gonna be late. They're gonna we gotta go.
I have to
Just
tune
sense of-
100 strings, man. We have to go.
Being professional. You don't want to waste other people's time.
Yeah.
Just like we don't want our time to be wasted.
Yeah. So then, I these days in my writer or whatever, I kind of put that make sure that our sound check time, whatever that you give us, make sure that the equipment is set up 1 hour prior to that. It helps a little, but
We've all been there. You
Yeah.
show up at the same time,
Yeah.
or if not before, the sound guy who's supposed to be setting up the equipment. And then they're loading in speakers. And then
it's these Jackson types, man. I'm telling you.
Jackson.
So yeah, it's something. I don't know. What does that mean for our career? Does that mean we're good, or that we're not good?
Do we need to be more tardy?
do we need to be late
more
so
good,
it seems
to
like we're
get
more
more-
diva-ish?
No, man. Again, we just have to put our best foot forward and hope that everybody else will acknowledge
Yeah.
that we're doing what we're supposed to do.
So yeah, one of the things that I think we've had conversations about in the past, but it's been a part of your work. I think your doctorate was related to this. Was that you use music to for social change? How did you get into that, and how do you work that into the music?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example where, I think in one of the first Sicklands I saw you perform a piece on the Oak Creek
the shooting.
massacre. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because sometimes I'll see musicians sort of play a piece, and then on top they'll just sort of say, and this
Put a
was for the
story.
children in Syria.
Sure.
Or this was for the immigration, and then I don't see a link. Or if I do, it's very, very loose. But the Oak Creek piece that you created, it seemed like that was from the ground up about that.
Right.
And is that an approach you take when you're dealing with social activism, or what's your process there?
Yeah, every artist has their own way to interface with their art and what it means as far as representing who they are and their place in the world. But for me, I think growing up as a Sikh, social justice is really important to who we are as people, as our ethos.
Definitely.
So I think that has trickled down into who I am as an artist. And that particular Sikh lens, that was one of the first ones I was a part of. So they emailed me early to ask if I was available,
Nice.
Right.
if I could perform, because usually, as we got Sometimes they got busy, and so those notifications came a little late. But for that one in particular, they said they wanted to do something to honor the shooting.
Okay.
And to be reflective. And they said that originally that the whole concert was going to be about that.
Okay.
So I really took that to heart. And I had started my doctorate at that point. So I'm still looking for topics, and I'm in a state where I can create art and I have that freedom and flexibility. And so I really took that in and was like, well, how can I honor this event? And how can I provide something, an artistic work that's going to help to reflect on what that is and what had happened? Because I think as a community, we're still dealing with the trauma of what that is. It's like an attack on a holy place, on sacred ground, a place of community, a place where we would go and feel safe. And when that's ripped away, especially as we as Sikhs, we look so different. So being a part of the American or, even worldwide aesthetic, there's Sikhs all over the world, and we've become a part of these separate communities. And we want to hope that we are integrated into those communities. But then something like this shooting happens and you feel like the other. Once again, you feel othered. You don't feel safe anymore. You don't feel like this is your larger community, that somehow you're seen as outside of that. So dealing with that trauma, both on an individual level, but I think collectively for the Sikh community as well, was important. And actually doing this piece really helped me focus what my doctorate was all about. So I used the music, my languages of jazz and Indian classical music, and tried to bring those in a way closer together from a harmonic, melodic perspective. Right. So there's a lot of these fusion projects that happen where, you have people from different backgrounds, but they're just doing what they do and happen to be playing at the same time.
Yeah. I don't like that approach.
Yeah, which doesn't really speak to integration of those two systems. So I was like, okay, how can I do that? But let me use this music to then tell stories of social justice. So being inspired by the jazz tradition and about African Americans during the civil rights era and other jazz musicians in America, as jazz being America's art form, to speak towards that experience. How can I use my music to speak towards my experience as a Sikh growing up in Canada, living in North America? And so the big projects I did around my doctorate, this piece, which I called Wisconsin, was the first. Okay. So looking at the Sikh experience in America and reflecting on that. And so I pulled lots of media clips from YouTube. So again, speaking to the freedom of information and the Second Amendment in America. So using that freedom of speech and the accessibility of media clips. So I pulled all those sources from news sources and interviews and things to reflect on what had happened.
So that piece was very emotional. Like it hit you hard. I mean, I remember seeing like video clips, like helicopter footage, news footage, and all that stuff. And then even that, you still felt disconnected. When I heard your piece, there's you hear the sirens, you hear the radio of
911 dispatch,
the 911 calls. Yeah. I felt like I was in that gurdwara, like that. Like I felt danger, like that, and unsafe. And that's like a compliment to your piece, that you put me in that space so that I could sympathize and empathize with the situation. And then your music was adding to that feeling. And then like every now and then, like the classical musician inside me be like, oh, I think that's Puriya Tanashri or whatever. But then I would get back into and which it was really powerful for me, because sometimes most of the time we're just like, as musicians, just analyzing things critically, like, oh, that note was flat, that matra was late,
that was amazing,
or like that was amazing, or whatever, like from a musical's perspective. And this subject is coming up in the couple of episodes that we've been doing, and that's because it's new to us, right? Like we've only sort of started telling a story with our music, like adding context to our music within the last year or two. And then you were one of the people that I looked to we're like, how are they telling a broader story? Because our training, I mean, you've gone through the same training.
Yeah,
and that's why I wanted to talk to you about this. Is you've gone through the same training for us, is that we're so like narrow mind, like our focus is on the music, right? Like if I have a tihai, right, like I'm trying to make it like trickier or more beautiful, or right, like just micro tweaking, right? Like if I go that's in the like rupic, right? But it's like that's whatever. Then you can go like so that makes it kind of cooler, right?
That's always.
But that's just music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's I haven't told the story yet. I haven't put anybody, and then I feel like
about the community.
Yeah, like the audience. The audience sometimes doesn't really care that you made that tihai more beautiful. Like they want a broader context, and so a lot of music now is for change. And so, how did you? Because you went through the similar training that we did, right? You in terms of the Indian classical side. Yeah. How did you make that leap to start telling something like a bigger story?
I'm still trying to figure that out. It's still a process. As Indian classical musicians, we're taught and we're students of this music. And because the way the tradition is set up, I think we have that student mindset. Because in some ways it's seen as disingenuous, or you're not as humble if you say that you're an artist. Somewhere there's never that point where the student artist that life can be meshed in some way. It's like you're always a kid. You're always a kid. Even when you're 30, 40 years old, 50.
40 you're a bacha, man.
You're emerging.
You're like still in diapers.
Yeah. So
where's this pacifier?
So that to take agency as an Indian classical artist, I don't feel it's readily accessible for artists to take that on and to be like, okay, this is my art. Let me do this. It always kind of gets shrouded in that student mindset.
Yeah.
Now, I'm lucky enough to come from the jazz background, and where, there was never any formal jazz education in America. How did you learn the music? By going to jam sessions, by just learning songs by ear, by playing from other people, by transcribing things off of records. You wouldn't go to a teacher and study and take lessons, because it was a music from the streets, really. It was a music that people were just making, music that people were just creating because they felt like that was their artistic vision and their voice. Then you had people coming up later on who took that to heart and expressed it through social activism as well. People like Charles Mingus wrote a song called The Fables of Phoebus about the governor of Mississippi. Nina Simone wrote Mississippi Goddamn, which was this like pseudo opera. John Coltrane wrote a piece called Alabama, which is for the bombing by the KKK of a black church in Alabama that killed 4 young girls. So seeing that and seeing how they use that music helped to inspire me. Nina Simone said it's an artist's duty to reflect the times in which they find themselves. So thinking about that in an Indian classical music context, it's hard to come up with many examples of what that was.
And that's what we've been, because I think what changed it for us was we became parents, and then we sort of started seeing stuff happening in the world, and we wanted to comment on it through our art, right? Because in the end, that's what we want to do. Yeah. But for 30 plus years, we've been in the Indian classical world where you're just trying to refine your craft, and then like you said, we're still students, and so we're not at that refined stage yet, which maybe you never reach, right? Like because even you talk to the greats, and they're like, yeah. I gotta still do this, and this, and I've got a few more lifetimes to go.
Yeah. Oh, even my teacher, Ustad Zakir Hussain, he said, well, because they asked even his father, Ustad Allah, that the mentality was always to be a good student.
Right.
And as much as bravado is there, and all these people who call themselves ustads and pundits and keeping material away from other people who are not worthy, their mentality and this style of music, I guess, from their Gharana or their kind of family was to be a student, because as soon as you close yourself off from learning,
Yeah.
then you stop growing.
Right.
So if you remain a student, you remain open to possibilities, you're going to keep getting better.
Yeah. And I think like, my teacher says
teacher
that
too, yeah.
all the time, Ustad
Yeah.
Tariq Khan. Her teacher,
Pandit,
Pandit Shiv
yeah.
Kumar Sharma, and says, like, they instill that in us, right? And it is in us, like that's in our heart, like we believe that to be 100% true. But yeah, we also, like I said, we're growing up in the West. Like I think all the artists, like all our teachers, and it's difficult to see like the pieces that they sort of right, like on social activism or anything, right?
Yeah, even I was trying to think, okay, what were some examples as I was doing my doctorate was like, what can I cite? And a lot of the examples were just thinking of ways that Indian classical music and other musics have coincided.
Yeah.
So thinking about, quote unquote fusion projects and this and that. But I was like, okay, for political things, what was it? And I think I have to come back to Pandit Ravi Shankar, who was one of the only ones. Of course, he had a big platform to do that. So concert for Bangladesh,
Yeah, that's the one,
which
yeah.
was huge. But even I think in India, to sit on a stage with someone like Bismillah Khan, with a Muslim,
Yeah.
have Hindus and Muslim unity, post partition, post the independence
Right,
of
that
India.
was the statement.
That was a big statement.
Yeah.
It's still a rift that you see.
Oh, it's
there.
prevalent. Yeah.
Definitely prevalent.
Yeah, there's countless examples of that.
So
in
you
the
can see
music
that
world,
the music they made wasn't any different, but the way they made the music, the fact that he
Yeah.
chose to perform together on one stage, that's making a statement.
Right.
So that's, your music doesn't always have to have a necessary one-to-one correlation with how your
Right.
activism is out there in the world.
Yeah, and I'm not implying that like this is our, like the three of us, like that this is our goal, that like every concert or performance should. But there are times when something comes to mind, or like this is not right, and what you can do is like what we have done in the past is like she'll play like that something in the news inspired her for the dog that she would pick that evening for the concert, and then that's also weighing on me, and like my sangat might be a little bit more subdued or like sad with the buying or something, but right, that's something that we internally sort of know, right, like that, oh, she saw that footage in the morning, so that's why she decided to play this rag at night, and but I don't know if that story makes it to the audience.
Well, I think
Yeah.
it's especially in these times where our audience are so much stimulated by visual things. So how do you
Yeah.
get people to listen to instrumental music in this day and age? Sitting in an auditorium watching people making music is becoming less and less appealing, as we can see. And I think all the time I'm trying to find ways to bring people to the music. So if you can have that connection with your audience and be able to tell them those things, even something small about the rag that'll give them some context. Because again, we're coming from that student mentality. We're coming from a
Yeah.
connoisseur's perspective.
Yeah, that's
where
exactly the word,
most people
connoisseur,
in the
yeah.
audience are not. So how do you give them a way in to this? That's why a lot of people are like, oh, classical music, it's too complicated,
highbrow.
it's too high. So there's the status thing. There's all these things keeping people away from the music. But as soon as you tie it to something that they can understand, it helps to give them a way in, a way to experience that in a different way.
Yeah, and then like your Oak Creek was eye opening for us, and as a Sikh, it put me in the space, and it was beautiful. So tell me about the other project you did for your doctorate.
So the other project I did was the music, the soundtrack for a friend of mine's film. And the filmmaker is named Satinder Kaur. She's here in Los Angeles. She's from Bellingham originally. And she made a film about a gentleman in Punjab who was a police officer. And this was during the 90s, in the era of that they called the decade of disappearances, where Punjab police especially were known for disappearing people. And this was a police officer who had seen one of these encounters, as they called it, where they took a young boy. He was only 15, and they, arrested him or captured him, and then basically killed him, murdered him, threw his body into the river. And that was the thing that caused him to be like, this is wrong. What is going on? And for him to speak out. So he's been fighting that battle in India to speak out against those type of atrocities that happen. He himself was imprisoned. He was tortured. His family was tortured. His father ended up dying because of the torture. And the gentleman himself, he's been fighting for justice like that for 20 plus years. And he hasn't been able to still file the FIR, the first information report, to get the case heard in India. So here's someone fighting for freedom against human rights violations, which Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have all corroborated, that this was a atrocity that has happened and occurred in Punjab, what people have gone through. So I wrote the music for that film. And just a little bit again. Yeah. So he's been fighting for 20 years just to get that first information report, which then they can have a trial, because nobody else wants to take that up. So the courts always find something small to, kind of dismiss his application or something that's happening. And then there's all these intimidation tactics. But so Satinder Sati Kaur, the film director, writer, made this short film. And then I was able to create some music for that. And so that film, you can see it. It's online. It's on Vimeo. It's on YouTube. The NSOF, the organization here in California, also helped to produce that film. And so that was one of bringing music and sound to this, and how do I do that, and how do I think about those sounds. So I chose to make a soundtrack that had a very intercultural type of approach. So using Indian instruments like bansuri or tabla, but also pairing it with Western instruments. So the piano played a big role, strings, because this is a global thing. We want to see that this is a human rights abuse. It's not just an abuse for people in India or in Punjab or against Sikhs. It's a greater than that. So how do I put that in a global context orally by combining it with different instruments? And again, doing it in an informed perspective. If I want to use a certain rag, how does the harmony pair with that? So I use that in many different ways. So at one of my recitals, we played the film live without any score, and we played the score live underneath.
Oh, cool.
So I had all live musicians, piano, bass, drums, a string section, myself playing bansuri, sitar, and tabla. I wasn't playing tabla. I had a different tabla player. So doing that. And then I also turned that into an art installation where I took segments of that film and I put them in a space where they were projected. And I had different podiums in the middle of the room that had artifacts on them. So this was all about how do we remember those who are not here anymore. It's through the things that they leave behind. And a lot of these disappearances where people are disappeared and never come back to their families only have little things to remember them with. And there's one shot in the film where there's this one mother, and the only picture she has is a passport-sized photo of her son that was left in her hand.
Wow.
And it's like, wow, that's so powerful. There's another shot of the film where there's just one shoe that was sitting there in the dirt, that this person had been taken, and all that was left. All that remains of that person's essence was this shoe. So that idea stuck in my head. And so I had these podiums, and I put that photo in a frame of just a small passport photo inside this frame. Another one I had a shoe. Another one I had a pair of glasses that was broken, that had been stomped on. So when you step into the space, you see these, and you see something projected on the wall that is blurry. And there's all this audio interference also. You can't hear the audio, you can't see the picture. There's all this distortion, all these things that are affecting it. And as you walk towards those artifacts, as you engage in the space, the picture and the audio become clearer. And that distortion goes away because you are the conduit for transmitting that story, to translate that story.
That's
to
pretty awesome.
understand that
Where was
story.
this?
This was at CalArts.
Wish we'd
that I
seen
did
it
that.
in real
Yeah.
life. It sounds amazing.
I'll share some. I have some clips. I put a small video together. That's not public. Maybe I'll release that. I'll put that up.
Yeah,
online
definitely. That'll be
somewhere.
cool.
A little bit
Amazing.
about that piece. So the way that I had done that is that in those podiums embedded, you can't see it, but there's a sensor that tracks distance. So as the people come closer to it, it's tracking their distance, and that parameter is being piped through a computer. And I had to write all this computer code and do all this stuff to translate their proximity into effects that were distorting the audio and the video.
Where'd you come up with like all this engineering stuff? Like, where did the
So again, going to school at CalArts, and I got to do coding classes there.
Nice.
And so I went into that. I took a circuit design class, and we started messing around with sensors and how do we use that in art.
Wow.
And
Oh, man.
so we messed around with Arduino microcontrollers and sensors, and how do we use that, piping it into other software, or writing our own code. So what I had done since I know you're an engineer as well. So I took that data from the sensor, and it went into an Arduino, which is a microcontroller. So then you pipe that into your computer and you write some code for it, and then you put the code back on the Arduino. And so it was taking that data, and the code I wrote was translating it into MIDI data. So essentially it became a MIDI controller. So MIDI is a type of language. It stands for musical interface device
I don't know what the last I is or
instrument, something like that. I forget what MIDI stands for.
Yeah.
Anyways, music interface device input, I think, is what it stands for. But anyways, so it's just numbers, ones and zeros. So like anything that uses that. So it's outputting MIDI data. And MIDI data is really useful because you can pipe it into other programs to control things. So I put all of those video clips into this VJing software called Resolume. And then in that, you can use what's called MIDI mapping. So even if you have any other MIDI controller, so a keyboard can be a MIDI controller.
Yeah.
And you can map it that, okay, when I press this key, it's going to put this effect on the video. And when I release that key, it's going to take it off.
yeah.
So instead of having a keyboard, I
use
made
their
that
movement.
the motion sensor was
Wow.
outputting
Pretty
the MIDI
smart.
data. So, and in that program, it's really fancy that way, is that you can map those MIDI parameters to audio effects as well as video effects. So I just went in there and made custom effects racks on each clip to affect them in different ways. So that, when you're
This
further
is
away
cool.
and
I
then you
know,
get
I wish it
closer.
was-
We
Seen
didn't.
it.
Why didn't we see this? Did
was-
we know you then?
I don't think we knew you then.
It was
We
only
must
up
have.
for a little time at the end of my doctorate before I graduated.
You got to put it up somewhere
you need
else.
to get somebody to. You need to get some galleries on your case.
Yeah, it'd be nice to do that again. It was
Listen,
a lot of
galleries,
fun.
you put this exhibition on her. We put the word out there. It's in the universe now.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun to do, because again, there's a lot of elements from the technology, from the music that came from the movie, but then again, how do you use that in a way that can engage people in a different way? There's only a certain number of people who are going to watch the movie. There's only a certain number of people that I could play my live concert, for the screening of it. But then there's a certain amount of people that are going to come who might be able to check it out in a gallery space.
Yeah.
So again, how do we take what we do and be able to provide it in different modalities so that it can have a wider reach?
That's amazing. I
Yeah,
really want to see
I
it.
want to see that.
You can set it up in our music room.
Yeah. Got some space there.
That's cool. What I wanted to. So you did a project at the Red Cat Theater too, right?
I did. So that was the final performance project that I did. So it was a 3-year DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts.
Okay.
And each year you have to do a performance project at the end of the year, which is a culmination of what you're working on during that
Oh,
portion.
okay.
So my final thesis project was around it's called Coma. And the Coma was a ship that came from India to Vancouver, where I'm from, in 1914. And the ship was full of Indian immigrants seeking to immigrate into Canada. And at that time, believe it or not, Canada was really racist. So they had passed laws preventing people from other countries to come. I believe it was the continuous passage law. is that you had to come from your country of origin on one ship in one, like with no stops along the way. And the only route that did that back then, they was operated by a Canadian company called CN, and they canceled that. So there's no way from people from India to come to Canada. Now, there are people from Europe who are immigrating to the other side of Canada.
Right.
And they might have not met some of the requirements of this law, but because they were melanin challenged, that they were allowed.
I got to trademark that.
This law wasn't really meant for them.
Yeah.
It's meant for, the people from Asia, be it Chinese,
or even
Japanese,
Africa or anything.
Yeah, be it, these othered communities from coming. So that ship the ship called Coma, which was a Japanese freighter. There was a gentleman by the name of Goodlett Singh who said, okay, we're going to challenge this law. He was also a businessman. So he's like, we're going to take goods and we're going to take people. We're going to take this Japanese freighter. We're going to sail it from India. We're going to go into Canada. And by taking the goods, we're going to be able to pay for the cost of doing this. And then we're also going to be able to bring all these people over as well. And so that ship came to Vancouver and sat there in the harbor for months. And the people were not allowed onto the shore even. They weren't allowed off of the boat. They weren't allowed to step shore on this land that they had traveled so far to see because they were fleeing what was going on in India.
Right.
This is pre-partition, pre-independence India. The British rule is getting stronger. There's a lot of problems happening there. So people just want an opportunity for a better life. And they think, if we go to this other land, something might be better. But they come here and they're met with the same type of thing. So they sat in the harbor for many months. Food supplies were running low. But however, there was a community on the shore already of diasporic Indians who had come before the law. So despite if they were, Punjabi or from different parts of the country, despite if they were Muslim or Hindu or Sikh, they all banded together to help their countrymen. Now, most of the people on the ship were from Punjab. Most of them were Sikhs. But back then, on the Gurdwara committee of the Ross Street Gurdwara, which is one of the oldest Gurdwaras in all of North America, there's Hindus and Muslims who are on the board, the Gurdwara board, because there was so few Indians.
Right.
They felt more tied together because of their cultural identity. The religion didn't matter. That was just a separate nuance of it. So, it was more that they could be together and they could understand the plight of each other and help each other out. So the community that was on board at that time really banded together. They got food and supplies together for the people on the ship, and they tried to fight with the government about what was happening. There's a Caucasian Canadian lawyer who agreed to take the case and to fight it, but he had gotten death threats. This was by a name J. Edward Bird, and he had to leave, and there was a trial, and eventually they upheld the law, and the ship and its passengers had to go back to India. And it went back. Imagine traveling at that time. It takes many months to cross the Pacific Ocean. They'd come many months. They sat for many months. Now they're going back. And then when they got back, the British took the ship. It was supposed to be back in Calcutta. Because a lot of the people were from Calcutta, or they'd come and they traveled from there. And they wanted to get back to their families or businesses or any things they had. They also had Guru Granth Sahib on the ship. So they wanted to take our holiest scripture, and they wanted to take it back to the Gurdwara, obviously, to install it, make sure to have it with respect. But the British thought, well, what are these Indians doing? They tried to go to Canada and they were turned around. And this is a time of a lot of dissension against the British. So the Gather Party, the Gather movement. So they thought these are just Gatherites, and they're going to add to the dissension in India. And so when the ship came back, they rerouted it to another port called Budge, and they came on board to arrest everybody. The passengers revolted. There was a shootout. Many of them died. There was, I think, 22 died there. Many of them escaped. Others were captured and sent back or sent to prison, just for wanting a better life. So being born and brought up in Vancouver and knowing this story and coming upon it almost being 2014, 100 years later, I thought, well, what can I do to reflect on this? How can I tell this story? Which, even though we're 100 years later, we're still seeing these things happen.
Yeah.
We're seeing immigrants still traveling by boat to
Drowning on
flee
boat. Children.
their own, their own homes, which have become unlivable. Even right now we have the plight of the migrant caravan, that's coming up to the southern border here in the States. But we've had other people, Syrian refugees, people
Right.
who tried to
Yeah.
cross.
That image of that toddler
across-
was
oh,
heartbreaking.
man, it's just
Still
too
going
much.
on.
And it's still going on. I was like, I need to say something about this. I need to reflect on this. So I wrote a whole suite of music around the Coma Got Tomorrow, around all the different chapters and all the different people that happened in that story, and about all the trials and tribulations and kind of the different ways that I could reflect on that story and tell it. So I recorded an album with that up in Canada, and then I expanded that work down here in California to include a string quartet along with the jazz musicians. And I had a friend of mine who's a great writer. She wrote some original poetry that was
Right.
spoken by an actor on stage, and I coupled that with images that were shown. So Kamaljeet's work she was kind enough to let me use some of her work to project in the background, along with other South Asian artists whom I know here in North America, in both Canada and the States, as well as one Indian artist, to again give a visual to what's happening on stage with the music, with the lighting design. I was trying to do a
Right,
a bigger show.
you're trying to tell this story through multiple dimensions.
Right, to give
And then we-
people a way to understand.
Yeah, that's great. We
We
feel
were at
that.
that one. That was pretty
Yeah.
powerful as well.
There's a track you did, uplifting. Can you talk about that track?
So there's a crossing the Pacific is I think the one that we were talking about before, and that's it was an uplifting type of piece.
Oh, right.
So this is the second track from the album and from the suite of work, which is about 80 minutes in total, and that piece is again set in a rag. So that's in rag Yemen, and it's set in a rhythmic cycle of 15 beats. And now so why did I choose these different things?
Yeah.
Well, and this piece was called Crossing the Pacific, the Hopes and Dreams of 376 Passengers. So it was, imagine being one of those passengers, leaving your homeland in the pursuit of something better and greater. So we have the Rag Yemen, which is very hopeful, optimistic. It kind of has this romance to it. So the romance of travel,
Right.
these kind of ideas. Think about, that's Rag also at sunset. So imagine sailing on a ship across the ocean around sunset. But you're also in a boat in the middle of the ocean, traveling to a country you know nothing about, a language that you don't know, a culture that you don't know, clothes that you don't know. So how do you navigate those rough waters, that rough terrain? So that's kind of what the 15 beat
All right, so you
rhythmic
made the
cycle
15 a
was
little bit
it's
uneasy.
a little tricky to
Yeah.
navigate that at the same time. So using those elements to tell this story, and being inspired by the work of one of my professors. His name was Wadada Leo Smith, American jazz trumpetist, composer, and he's done a lot of work to look at the American experience and of African Americans, and he's done a lot of work to look at that. So we spoke about how do you depict these things and what do you use? And he said you can even just use one element, one moment, and reflect on that musically. You don't always have to have a one-to-one relationship.
Right.
So in music we call that programmatic. Where this sound, like think of Peter and the Wolf. It's like, this instrument represents this animal and this sound represents this and this. That's an approach. But Wadada was more like, you can, so he did a piece around JFK, and he said, I can just focus on the motorcade, or I can just focus on even the spinning of the tire. What does it mean for the tire to be in motion? And what was the acceleration point of that tire during the shooting, and what happened with that tire? So for him, it's about getting down to picking a more specific point and then expanding that
Right.
in a musical way.
And then this specific point then will give you the broader
that
context.
gives you the
Yeah.
context to explore.
That's amazing. Let's listen to this piece right now
Yeah.
in Rag Yemen. And we're back. That was a beautiful piece. I remember hearing it at the Red Cat Theater. It was amazing. In the context. But we have also played this piece live at a gig with just Neelamjit and I.
Yep.
We played it in sort of this. I don't know what the word is, like a bastardized version of 15. Right? It wasn't Pancham Swa. So Neelamjit and I are from the same Gharana of tabla, right? I'm learned from Ustad Ali Khan, he learns from Ustad Zakir Hussain, and our grand guru is Mia Qadar Baksh, right? That's what the common link is. But we have two different ways of playing 15, and I think this episode has like talked a lot about social activism and change and giving music a broader context. I think we definitely want to have you back to talk about things like that like we have different versions of 15, and we'll get into more sort of things about gharanas and sangat and a more technical talk.
I'd love that. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're one of our closest friends, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thanks.
Anytime. But yeah, we're really thankful to have you here. After this podcast, I think we're gonna jam.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's what we always do when Neelamjit comes over.
Oh yeah, he loves his little games.
And then these two guys, they're fellow Jeets, right?
Jeet.
Jeets in the house.
Yeah, I don't know what they won, but they won. They think they won something.
We're winning life.
We're the winners, man.
They're winning life. A Neelam and a Kalam. Come on. But yeah, so why don't you tell the folks where they can find you, where they can find your work?
You can always follow me on Instagram at Neelamjit Music. I'm on Twitter under the same handle, Neelamjit Music. Post about there, what's going on. I'm on Facebook. You can find my website, which is neelamjit.com. And those are all ways that you can keep in touch with me.
Yeah, and you guys should check him out. Like his Wisconsin piece, I believe, is up on YouTube.
It
and
is.
then his entire album is up on
Available
iTunes.
to buy
Yep.
right
Yeah,
now.
so go buy it. And then if you can give Kamaljeet and I some love too. We're Instagram at absolute_focus, YouTube at absolute focus, and patreon.com/absolute focus. So check us out, and thanks for listening.
Thanks very much. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to hit the subscribe button.